Right now, you're listening to the Azeem Digital Asks Podcast, the podcast where I talk to some of the top marketers in the industry and find out what makes them tick. Hello and welcome back to the Azeem Digital Asks Podcast. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Phil Gregory, who describes himself as a mixed-race SEO business owner in the all-white Peak District. Labelled a failure most of his life, he's a militant and a fighter, passionate about improving the web. So I'm really interested to hear more from Phil. Phil, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, Azeem. Very pleased to be here.
Good stuff. So before you introduce yourselves properly to the listeners, I wanted to ask you a bit of an icebreaker question, and that is, if you could change places with anyone in the world, who would it be and why?
This is a great question. I think it's going to have to be the man with the most money in the world. Now, I don't want to sound shallow because I wouldn't keep that money for myself. I would change places with Jeff Bezos because if you had, I think it was valued at $1 trillion or something the other day.
Oh,
You had $1 trillion. Just think of all the good you could do in the world. There's so many projects that are deserving of a little bit of assistance, and that would be great to get your hands on that, wouldn't it?
yeah, definitely. I feel a bit guilty for my answer now because when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, oh, I'd love to be like a Hollywood film star, but you've got a much more sensible answer.
Well, it'd be nice to have all those things, but yeah, I think if I had 30 minutes before I was to die, I think it'd have to be get my hands on some of that cash and use it really well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just harboring small, fading hopes of being the first Asian James Bond, but it's never going to happen. So anyway, yeah, thank you very much for joining me today. Would you like to give the listeners a little bit of a better introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Phil Gregory, and I'm the owner director of Peak District SEO. I set the company up in 2017, but I have been doing SEO since about 1998, where I was sort of like forced to use computers when I was at university and accidentally stumbled upon the possibility of making websites and just thought, oh my God, this is so cool. I must learn more about it. And since then, it's been a roller coaster. And today, the business has been going well. I've sort of got 20 plus clients and continuing to grow. So yeah, that's Phil Gregory and Peak District SEO.
Awesome. Yeah, really pleased to hear that you're doing well, and also very interested to learn more. Imagine you must have seen so much change in the industry since the late 90s up until now. So let's touch on that a little bit. What point in your career did you realize that marketing was going to be the one for you?
Well, I guess it was probably actually before I was started working in marketing. Again, when I was at university, I was a complete computer noob. I couldn't use a computer, didn't own a computer. And so I spent a lot of time in the IT help suite, badgering the guys who worked behind the desk, saying, how do you do this? How do you format a Word document? Annoying student. But I had to just learn everything. That was, it's like, uh, I can't sit here and just be unarmed. So I had to know everything that I could possibly learn about how to use these computers. And once I discovered, as I say, sort of stumbled upon how to make a web page, a light bulb went on for me and thought, this is going to be really powerful for businesses in the future. You're going to be able to present everything and you're going to be able to talk to your customers directly and maybe even sell online, because back then you couldn't, there was no selling online even. So the light went on really early, but I wasn't able to act on it for some many years after that.
Ah, interesting. So thinking about that specifically then, especially with what you've just said, if you could go back to when you first began in the industry, knowing what you know now, what advice do you think you would give to yourself?
Well, I think really, Azeem, the best advice I could give my previous self would be to focus on your strengths. Um, when I first started getting into computers, as I say, it was about web design and stuff like that, and let's make web pages, and I noodled around with that until I discovered SEO, and then SEO was the passion, and web design became a back seat. But with all these things, making web pages, you learn Photoshop, Fireworks, Dreamweaver, HTML, CSS, PHP,
Yeah.
online advertising, social media marketing. Now, I've done all of these things, and if I could go back, I'd say, hey, Phil, sweep all that stuff to one side, focus on the SEO, because that's what you're good at, and that is where your passion lies, and that's where you're going to make the most money from. All the other stuff was fun, but in fact, it was a massive distraction, and probably prevented me from getting ahead earlier.
Really interesting answer. Brilliant to hear that, especially from someone who's got a lot of experience. Touching on that, what have you learned from your working career?
I think really that's a really good question. It's difficult to say what I've learned. So much, probably so much that I've forgotten a lot of it. But I think it's really key to focus on the basics. Now, this is something that makes me laugh in the SEO community, because I follow hundreds of SEOs on Twitter, and there are some who are hardcore, down to basic brass tacks guys who just get on with optimizing sites. And there are other guys who are very flamboyant. They're always on the absolute apex of the cutting edge, and they're always talking about, oh, this new technology, or learn this new piece of code, or scan your site with Ajax, or all kinds of new things. And I always say the best thing I've learned is to keep away from trends and fads, because what they end up doing is they suck your time, and only about 2% of those little trends and fads ever work out. So as a self-employed businessman, I don't really have the time to sit fiddling with fads. I tend to wait and see what actually works rather than jumping on the bandwagon.
That's a great answer, and something that definitely resonates with me. Looking after the absolute basics is something that's often overlooked, which when you say it out loud, it sounds kind of strange to actually hear that. But when you hear that from someone like yourself who's got a lot of experience in the industry, I think that will definitely ring true with the listeners.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to sort of respond again to that, I mean, just as an example, if there are any SEOs or marketers or web developers listening, the amounts of websites that come to me, oh, Phil, can you give the site an audit? And I give the site an audit, and it's like the site isn't being compressed for mobile devices in any way. There are like 200 pages with no meta descriptions. I just think this is just basic stuff. I mean, it's not, nobody even needs to be paying for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, focus on the basics, get all that right first, and then go to the nuanced detail.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. You touched there on your last answer, Phil, about the industry and others in the industry, which nicely brings me on to asking you about who has been a big inspiration for you in the industry. Who do you look up to, and who is that person, or who are the people for you that you really look out for?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I mean, there are so many, obviously, I couldn't really list them, but there's a couple who stand out to me for different reasons. The first is, I don't want to be cheesy, but it's so generic, but it's Rand Fishkin. I mean, Rand Fishkin, who set up Moz, I've got to say, he's like the world's nicest guy. As you can't fail to appreciate the effort he puts in to every blog post, every article, every video, and he just oozes personality and compassion. And I think that's something that's really missing in marketing. There's, it can be a bit of a cutthroat, money grabbing industry at times, and Rand really personifies human contact. He's the sort of person I would want to work for, or the sort of person I would want to hire if I could ever afford him.
I'm sure if he's listening, which I imagine he will be, he's going to love hearing that. So yeah,
Well, and then there's another chap, and now this one's a more controversial thing. There's a chap who goes on Twitter, and he's a good SEO. He's a no nonsense type of chap, and he told me, I think, that sometimes that gets him into trouble. But I quite like Barry Adams because he's very blunt. He tells it as it is. He's never mean, but he just calls a spade, if that's the right, terminology. Yeah,
Yeah.
he just gets to the point, and I know that sometimes that rubs people up, particularly younger SEOs and marketing people who are a little bit more, shall we say, emotionally intelligent. But Barry just cuts to the chase. He's my generation, so I think he makes me chuckle.
I've heard also that Barry is a big fan of AMP, so he's going to love that as well. So yeah, brilliant. Two brilliant answers. I'm sure they'll both be happy to hear that, especially coming from someone like yourself. I just wanted to ask you then, you've mentioned that you're a self-employed business owner. You've been that way for a while now. What are the sort of biggest challenges that you've got now, and how are you overcoming them?
My challenges now are outside of SEO in so many ways. It's about running a business. When I wake up at night thinking about the business and go to sleep at night thinking about the business, it's all about how can I improve the service I deliver. And it is just me at the moment because my assistant's gone off ill, and I'm kind of having to cover a lot of options.
Yeah.
It's all about how can I scale the business, bring new people in, good people that I can afford to hire, but are also keen to learn SEO and grow. That is the number one challenge I'm facing now, scaling the business, and I'm taking some action with them, working with an action coach to basically move my business to the next stage so that we can take on more clients and also bigger clients.
It's a lockdown podcast, so I'm going to ask about COVID. How has COVID affected your business, and how have you responded?
Okay, well, I could see this coming from some way away. When the news first broke in China, I was looking at it thinking,
Yeah.
there's a tidal wave coming, and I think we're going to have to get ready for it. I sort of emailed out all my customers and just said, look, we're here, we know what's happening, we're ready to respond. And at first, it was like tumbleweeds, nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, clients started to panic, about the possibility of having to lay off staff, etc., etc. And, I probably lost immediately a third of the business. And when I say
Wow.
lost, my clients phoned me up and they said, Phil, we're just going to have to pause because we want to hold on to our money, which
Yeah.
was really quite devastating because the business was growing nicely. But I'm pleased to say that it's been a bit of a seesaw situation. So that happened once people realise actually this isn't too bad and we can adapt, we can pivot, we can come back. They phoned me back up and said, right, we're ready to go back on again now. So they came
Yeah.
back on. Then I had a couple of people who started panicking late, saying, we're just not getting enough money. So they drop off. And then now it's picking up again. So I'm really pleased that it is picking up. And I think as the country gets back to work, we're just going to see more and more growth because the economy was heading in the right direction anyway before this hit. So I think people now that they've got, they've adapted slightly, more traditional businesses have jumped online, people have changed the way they work, working from home. If anything, I think we'll come out of it stronger.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really interesting answer because previous guests have all had different answers about responding to coronavirus. But I think you're the first, Phil, that said you were proactive and got in touch with your clients early on. Okay, as you mentioned, tumbleweeds, but being proactive and letting your clients know, look, this is something that's on the horizon is brilliant. Great sign of a good marketer who's on top of the latest trends. Speaking of which, how are you doing that? How do you continue to learn and gain knowledge in order to sort of stay in line with the industry?
Yeah, learning has always been a thing for me. It's more, I wasn't amazing at school, I'll tell you that. I think I came out of my initial schooling with no GCSEs, and I went back to school and did that in sixth form, and then in college, then A levels, and then a degree. And learning has always been a big thing for me. I come from a very shall we say, I come from a hilltop town in the middle of the Peak District where men are men and people are scared. And people work more in the trades, and university or anything like that wasn't really valued. But I've always been obsessed with getting ahead, and trying to pull myself out of what I saw as, abject poverty, really, when we first started off. So I read a lot. I read all the books I can get. I've got a subscription to Audible, and I find that podcasts, and that's how I found you. Podcasts are my go-to because they allow me to learn from my peers on the go. I can be out for a run, I can be working in the garden, but I can still be taking on key information from people who I respect. Um, you know, that's my go-to learning session at the moment.
Good stuff. Thank you very much for the free plug there. I'll pay you once we stop recording. So yeah, really, really interesting. A lot of positives that you've mentioned about. I'm just going to flip that on its head a little bit now and talk about failure. So what in the last 12 months has been the biggest failure for you or for your business? And why do you think that happened?
Well, yeah, that's a good one. So I think realistically, the biggest failure that I have is what so many business owners talk about, and it's the fear of imposter syndrome. When you set up your own business, you just go from being an employee on day one to all of a sudden this, some kind of supposed mastermind on day two, and learning the ropes of running a business. It's quite tricky. You're not just doing SEO, you're doing customer relations, you're doing accounting, you're doing forward planning, you're doing staff management. And so, in terms of failure, I think I judge myself pretty hard. I do drive myself quite hard. I think communication, being able to communicate to the clients and to staff members that I've had just exactly what the vision of the company is and where we're going to go next is my biggest failure. But it's something that I plan to learn from. You're just going to keep going.
Yeah.
Nobody gets it all right in the first few years. The most successful business people of all time have all said, I failed multiple times to get where I am today. And I accept failure. It's part of learning. Without failure, you think you're doing brilliant, and then you can become arrogant and cocksure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for those type of people who are like, as you described, in my opinion, failure definitely hits them harder. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting one.
I mean, look, we've all failed in life, haven't we? At certain things, you might think you're good, you're in for a competition or a sporting event, and you think you're going to do well, and then all of a sudden, you get shown by someone who's worked harder or is more dedicated, and that's going to happen even in business. Um, I welcome it personally because my aim is to deliver the best service possible over time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what you've said there resonates with me massively. I think my opinion is there are parts of the industry that are in a race to be first, the first to do this, the first to do that. But I thinking back to what you said earlier about getting the basics right and what you've just said there about, delivering the best you can for your clients is very underrated. If you're the first, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the best at it.
And that's so true. And it's also about refining. You may have a fantastic technique, you may have a fantastic process that you roll out. It's making money for you. The clients are happy, but it doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean that it can't be refined. It doesn't mean that it's the most optimal. So I'm always looking for improvements.
Yeah, awesome. Speaking on that, then, let's talk about right now. Obviously, with confidentiality in mind, can you share with our listeners what you're working on right now?
Yeah, well, I can. I've got some pretty decent clients coming in at the moment. Big company who work with industry. Obviously, I can't reveal exactly what they do, but it's
Yeah,
basically about creating an environmental solution for heavy industry. Um, and again, that's something that resonates with me. We all know heavy industry exists. We all know it's a big polluter, which causes me a worry. I'm a bit of a greenie. Uh,
yeah,
but this company are actually taking strides to eliminate, the toxic elements of the work that must be done. So by helping them to market themselves and take a foothold in the market, then that's where I come in, and I'm really proud to help companies who are trying to change the way we do things. So that's what I'm working on as well.
great stuff. Sounds really interesting. Definitely keep us posted on that. I'll be sure to check that out.
Yeah, I will do.
Just before we finish, I ask all of my guests that if me and you were to swap roles,
Yeah.
what question would you ask yourself that I've not asked you?
Okay, I've got one serious one and I guess a flippant one.
Go
So
on then.
I'll probably ask you something about what what your ethnicity is like and whether it's affected you, within in the business community, within the marketing community, because obviously there are not many people of color working in this industry, and if there are only a few of us visible. Not
Hmm.
that I think it's massively important. I think your attitude is far more important than the color of your skin or your background.
Yeah.
So that's a serious question. The flippant one is SEO dead?
So, but given that you've asked it, you can go first. Do you feel like your ethnicity or your skin color has held you back at all?
I'd say probably in the early days, maybe, yeah, because it was quite a universally white industry. Nowadays, 20 years have passed since I was at uni when I was struggling to, put myself out there. Nowadays, I don't know, people have a much more broad mind. I'm seeing people of colour in getting into good positions, standing up on stage, demonstrating their expertise just the same as everyone else. So, when I first set up the business, I was panicking about it, especially living in the Peak District. As I say, even though I grew up here, I thought, well, how will people respond to me as a business owner? Are they going to trust me with their money? Is it going to be about the work I do, or is it going to be about their perception of me? But so far, I've been pleasantly surprised, and I think we live in a new world.
Yeah, absolutely agree. For me, I would say pre-COVID, probably yes. So I've written a few blog posts about this on my website, which you can check it out. I've also given a few conference talks about this. I had a couple of moments where I was attending conferences with a notepad and pen, trying to take in as much information as I could. Like, these are people in the industry who've been chosen to speak at conferences. And then just something happened at one conference, and I just took a second to sort of scan through this lineup, and I just thought, well, everybody is white here, and like, where are the people of color? And as you mentioned, there are not many people of color in marketing in general. So I looked around in the crowd, and there were people of color there, but the entire lineup was white, and I just thought, well, there's some kind of disparity here.
Mm,
Is this just me making an issue out of something that might not be an issue, or is this genuinely a bigger thing? So I went away. I did an anonymous survey where I spoke to the industry last year, asked them for their thoughts and feedback. All anonymous, because sometimes people want to speak about things but are afraid of attaching their name or their company to it. So I did that, spoke to the industry, some really, really interesting results that I got back. And then I looked at conference lineups, and I just thought, well, this is really sad to see that there were several conference lineups where I found one conference that had one black speaker over a few years who was the same black speaker every year. And then
mhm,
this year, before COVID hit, the entire lineup was white. So obviously he must have been busy this year. But I look at that and I think, well, there are lots more marketers of color who are doing really, really great things and deserve to be put on a stage. But as you've mentioned, there's a lot of work being done by numerous people in the industry to raise awareness of not only black people but sort of black, indigenous people of color, to say, look, we are here, we have a voice, we are doing good things. So yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes part of the issue is probably with me that I probably want to see progress happen faster than what it is, but I also recognize that these types of microaggressions and issues have happened for a number of years now, and to expect change to happen just at the click of a finger is probably not realistic. But I think it's a sign of passion, definitely.
Yeah, I would agree with what you're saying there, Azeem. Like as I said to you before we started this podcast, I'm coming up for my 47th birthday, and society's massively changed in the time that I've grown. Um,
Yeah,
but sometimes it's two steps forward, one step back. So I want to be more visible myself, and I want other people of color, whether they're from Asian backgrounds, black backgrounds, or whatever, to be more included. But I don't want tokenism. I
yeah,
don't want to ever be on the stage as the only black speaker because I am.
yeah,
I want to be there because I'm a real person. You know, that so I think that's more critical. We don't want to ever, people tell me that there's a lot of tokenism at the moment, and I don't want to be part of that. I want to be recognised for what I do.
yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with you there. I think there is to an extent, but it's just a case of trying to balance that. And as you've rightly said, people should be on stage regardless of what skin color they are, on merit and how good they are and how knowledgeable they are on that subject, rather than let's just invite Joe Blogs or Jane Blogs because they're black and we need to tick a box. It's the wrong way to do
Yeah. So what about SEO then? Is it dead?
it. Well, for me, if it dies, there's always PPC, but I know that will ruffle a few feathers. I don't think so. I think it's evolving. That's my two pence. And as you've rightly mentioned, you're somebody who's got a lot more experience than me in this industry, so you've probably seen a lot more change in SEO than I have. So I just think it's an ongoing cycle of change. And although we do need to make sure the basics are looked after, I think a small proportion of us or percentage of us should have a slight eye on what's changing or what's incoming. Think of a ranking change, for example. You've got to respond to that fairly quickly, otherwise you could be in trouble. Something like that. What about you?
Yeah, I'm in. I'm in agreement with you. From my point of view, SEO isn't dead, and for the simple reason, it's not. We're not talking about technology or technology changes here. We're talking
Mm,
about, I see it because I live in a rural area. Half the businesses here still aren't fully online. So, there's hundreds of thousands of businesses still to come online. Forget e-commerce and big marketing like that. We're talking about getting people online, getting people set up, getting people found, getting them registered with all the relative accounts where they can raise their visibility. There's
mm,
absolutely 10 years of SEO work, basic grunt work to be done across this country. And then if you think about, compare how advanced Britain is with many, many other countries in the world, SEO isn't dead and it isn't going to be dead for some time.
brilliant answer. Unfortunately, we are nearly coming to the end of this podcast, which is a shame because I've had a really great discussion with you today. But I always end with one question, which will end up in me curating some sort of playlist. So when you need to get deep into your productivity zone, what is your go-to song, artist, playlist? What's in your ears?
Great question. So it's a tricky one, this actually, because a lot of the time I like silence when I'm working. I don't always play music when I'm working,
Yeah.
but when I'm on a roll, it has to be, and this is going to shock people, it has to be Iron Maiden, and it has to be Run to the Hills. It's just a fantastic song with a galloping beat, and it makes me feel invincible.
This is super interesting to hear, Phil, because if you listen to some of the other episodes and some of the ones that are due to be released, I'm absolutely positive that I'm missing something here, because a lot of marketers listen to the similar genre of music like you've mentioned there.
Uh-huh.
And for me, I just could not. I can't do it. Like, I would just want to rock out at my desk. That's the type of stuff I would listen to if I'm in the gym. So for me, I like listening to like classical music or some sort of piano music, just very low contact, so I don't pay attention, no lyrics, just something there. But I can just imagine you now sitting at your desk, rocking out to some SEO audit.
Yeah, I think probably when I'm doing a crawl or something like that, rather than when I'm actually writing copy.
Brilliant. Phil, you've been a great guest. Thank you very much for joining me. If people want to find out more about you or get in touch, how can they do that?
Well, I guess the easiest way would be to jump on Google and type in Peak District SEO. You'll find every page going about me there. Or if you want to connect with me personally, then you can do it on LinkedIn. I've got a big smile on my photo, so that should be pretty easy to find.
Yeah, the I was going to say users then, that's the web person in me. The people listening will definitely see that, especially when I put out the teaser for this episode, which shows the photo of you looking probably no more than 19, which I'm incredibly jealous of. But yeah, as I've mentioned, Phil, thanks very much for joining me. I will let you have the last word on this podcast. It's all yours.
Azeem, thanks very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for giving me this opportunity.
So that was another great episode in the bag. I'm really enjoying hearing from some of the top names in this industry, and I hope that you are too. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating, like, share and subscribe. You can find out more about the podcast on the Twitter page at Azeem Digital Asks, all one word, and also on my website, which is iamazeemdigital.com. Also, if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, you can get in touch with me via my website. And that's it from me. Looking forward to the next episode already. Take care.